He thought trading his wife for someone younger was the ultimate upgrade, but when an unexpected twist flips his world upside down, he learns the hard way that betrayal always comes with a price. The night was cold, but not as cold as the heart of Damien Hawthorne. The renowned millionaire, celebrated for his ruthless business acumen and pristine public image, stood in his luxurious penthouse, sipping an aged whiskey, the golden liquid swirling in his crystal glass. He exhaled slowly, staring out at the vast cityscape of New York, where his empire thrived, stretching across industries like finance, real estate, and technology. To the outside world, he was an unstoppable force, untouchable in his wealth and power. But tonight, something else held his attention: divorce papers, neatly stacked on his mahogany desk. He glanced at the papers, then back at his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window. A man of power, a man in control. That's how the world saw him, and that's how he saw himself. So why then did a nagging sensation persist, whispering doubts in the back of his mind? It was simple, really. He had made his decision. He was moving forward with his life. Evelyn was his past. The sound of heels clicking against the polished marble floor interrupted his thoughts. Valeria Monroe appeared in the doorway, her stunning figure framed by the dim glow of the penthouse lights. A silk robe draped over her, barely concealing the lingerie beneath. Her lips curled into a victorious smirk. "Still thinking about it?" she asked, tilting her head. Damien's jaw tightened. "I'm thinking about how long I should wait before making the announcement official." Valeria approached him, draping her arms over his shoulders. "Why wait? Everyone knows we're together now. The sooner you finalize things, the sooner we can start our future." Our future? The words should have brought him excitement. Instead, they tasted hollow. Still, he nodded. Valeria didn't waste another moment. She reached for the pen on his desk and placed it in his hand. "Then sign it, Damien." And he did. Across the city, in a more modest but elegant townhouse, Evelyn Hawthorne sat in quiet devastation, the weight of betrayal pressing down on her chest like a stone. Her marriage, once filled with love, trust, and shared dreams, was now reduced to a legal contract waiting to be dissolved. She had given Damien 15 years of her life, stood by his side when he had nothing, helped him build his empire, and sacrificed her own aspirations for their marriage. And yet, without remorse, he had discarded her like an outdated business deal. His reason? A younger woman. Valeria Monroe was a 28-year-old socialite, a model-turned-influencer, known for her striking beauty and insatiable hunger for the finer things in life. She was everything Damien believed he wanted now: youthful, fresh, and unattached to the struggles of building an empire. Compared to Evelyn, Valeria was exciting, a prize he could parade in elite circles. He convinced himself he was simply upgrading, that love had an expiration date and his had long since faded. Evelyn had tried to reason with him at first. "We built this together," she had said, her voice raw with emotion. "This life, this empire. It wasn't just you, Damien. I was there every step of the way." Damien's expression had remained indifferent, unreadable. "I'm grateful for everything you've done, Evelyn. But things change. We've changed." "You've changed," she corrected, her voice barely above a whisper. Damien had sighed, rubbing his temples. "Look, I don't want to make this harder than it needs to be. I'm offering you a generous settlement." Evelyn scoffed. "You think this is about money?" "That's exactly what this is about," Damien snapped, his voice taking on that sharp edge he reserved for business negotiations. "I built this life, Evelyn. The least I can do is make sure you're taken care of. You should be thanking me." Thanking him. Evelyn clenched her jaw, swallowing the bitterness that threatened to spill. No, she didn't understand. She didn't understand how a man could throw away 15 years of marriage for something as fleeting as lust. She didn't understand how he could look at her, his wife, his partner, and feel nothing but indifference. That night, she signed the papers. The following week, Damien flaunted Valeria at a charity gala, parading her around like a trophy while the cameras flashed. The sight of them together made Evelyn feel physically ill, but she held her head high, refusing to let the world see her pain. It wasn't until weeks later that Damien made the final move, kicking Evelyn out of their home. "This penthouse belongs to me," he had said nonchalantly, sipping his morning espresso as Evelyn packed her belongings. "You have a week to leave." She had stared at him, barely recognizing the man before her. "I built this life with you, Damien, and I appreciate that," he replied smoothly. already shifting his attention to his phone. But things change. It's just business, Eve. Just business. Evelyn left without a word. Her heart ached, but she knew one thing. She wasn't going to fade into the background, not like some forgotten first wife. Number. If Damien wanted to underestimate her, he would soon regret it. Because Evelyn Hawthorne wasn't just the woman behind a powerful man. She was powerful on her own, and he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. With determination burning in her veins, she made a silent vow. She would rise from this, and Damien Hawthorne would never see it coming. Evelyn Hawthorne had always believed in loyalty, in building something that would last. When she married Damien, he had been nothing more than an ambitious man with a dream and the drive to achieve it. He had no fortune, no family name to support him, just raw determination and a brilliant mind for business. And Evelyn? She had been his anchor, the one who kept him grounded, who worked tirelessly behind the scenes, ensuring his vision didn't crumble before it even had the chance to flourish. She was there through the late nights, the financial struggles, the countless failures before his eventual rise to power. She had sacrificed her career, her personal ambitions, all because she believed in their future together. She never imagined that the very man she had supported through it all would one day discard her like an expired contract. But life had a cruel way of revealing the truth. Damien's betrayal was swift and heartless. After serving her with divorce papers, he wasted no time in replacing her with Valeria Monroe, a woman whose only talent seemed to be draping herself over powerful men. The public spectacle of their relationship made headlines almost immediately. Photos of Damien and Valeria at high-end restaurants, luxury vacations, and charity galas filled magazines and social media. It was as if he wanted the world to know he had upgraded. For Evelyn, the worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was how effortlessly he had erased her from his life. One moment she had been his wife. The next she was nothing more than a footnote in his success story. The media, ever hungry for scandal, twisted the narrative. Articles speculated that Evelyn had been holding Damien back, that he had finally freed himself from an outdated marriage. Some even suggested she had been bitter, refusing to let him go, painting her as the scorned, aging wife left behind for a younger, more exciting woman. Evelyn refused to respond. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Instead, she left the city. A small town along the East Coast became her refuge. She found solace in the quiet, away from the flashing cameras and judgmental stares of high society. For the first time in years, she wasn't surrounded by business deals and PR statements, just the sound of waves crashing against the shore, the scent of salt in the air. She rented a modest home, something simple yet elegant. She needed time to think, to heal. But healing wasn't as easy as she thought. Nights were the hardest. The empty bed, the silence, the overwhelming loneliness that came with knowing the man she had loved for so long had never truly valued her. She wondered if he ever thought about her, if he ever missed her. Probably not. Still, Evelyn was never the type to wallow in self-pity. She knew she had two choices: let this betrayal define her or redefine herself. She chose the latter. 3 months into her self-imposed exile, Evelyn finally faced the truth. She needed to start over, but not just in the way people expected. She wasn't going to settle for being the ex-wife of Damien Hawthorne. No, she was going to remind the world exactly who she was. She started making calls, contacts she had made over the years, business executives, investors, people who had once respected her as Damien's partner but had always underestimated her. She met with financial advisors, lawyers, and strategists. Most were surprised to hear from her. Some were hesitant to work with her at all. You could take the settlement and live comfortably for the rest of your life, one advisor suggested. Why get back into the game? Evelyn smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Because I'm not done. And she wasn't. Over the next several months, Evelyn meticulously laid out her plans. She had been silent long enough. She had watched Damien build an empire, watched him revel in his wealth and power. Now it was her turn. She founded Hawthorne Capital, a private investment firm specializing in funding women-owned businesses, startups, and companies focused on ethical business practices. But this wasn't just about business. This was about proving a point, that she hadn't been just the wife of a powerful man. She had been the foundation of his success. And without her, Damien would soon realize just how much he had truly lost. While Evelyn rebuilt her life, Damien remained blissfully unaware. His new life with Valeria was everything he thought he wanted: luxury, indulgence, and a partner who never challenged him. Valeria adored the finer things in life, and Damien, eager to please, ensured she had them all. Expensive jewelry, designer clothes, lavish trips. Nothing was off limits. At first he enjoyed it, but as time passed, cracks began to form. Valeria, as beautiful as she was, lacked the depth and strength that had once grounded him. Their conversations rarely ventured beyond social events, fashion, and what gifts she wanted next. She had no interest in his work, no understanding of the empire he had built, and for the first time, Damien felt something unfamiliar: boredom. He would catch himself reminiscing about the nights he and Evelyn had spent in deep discussion, the way she had challenged him, pushed him to be better. He had resented it then, but now, he realized that Evelyn had been more than just his wife. She had been his equal. With Valeria, there was no challenge, no real partnership, just the illusion of love wrapped in silk sheets and expensive perfumes. And then, the calls started coming in. First from his lawyers, then from business associates. "Have you seen this?" one of his longtime friends asked, forwarding him an article. Damien frowned as he opened the link. Evelyn Hawthorne returns with a vengeance. Introducing Hawthorne Capital. His eyes narrowed as he read the article. Evelyn was back, not as some forgotten ex-wife living off a settlement, but as a competitor, and not just any competitor, one that had the potential to shake the very foundations of his business empire. Damien's grip tightened on his phone. For the first time since their divorce, he realized something. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost his greatest ally, and now she was coming for everything he had built. Evelyn had expected Damien to react. She knew him well enough to know that his pride wouldn't allow him to ignore her sudden rise, and she was right. Days after the article's release, she received a message. "Damien Hawthorne, we need to talk." Evelyn stared at the screen, a slow smirk forming on her lips. "No, Damien, you had your chance. Now it's my turn." Evelyn didn't respond to Damien's message. She wasn't ready to entertain whatever excuses, regrets, or warnings he had prepared. No, he had made his choice when he discarded her like a worn-out accessory. Now she had her own path to walk, and she wasn't about to let him slow her down. Instead of dwelling on his message, she turned her attention to Hawthorne Capital. The firm was growing at a staggering pace, faster than even she had anticipated. She had been strategic in her approach, carefully selecting startups and businesses that aligned with her values. But more importantly, she had chosen companies that would send a direct message to Damien. One of her first major investments was Pierce Technologies, an AI-driven software company that had once been in negotiations with Hawthorne Enterprises before Damien rejected their proposal. He had deemed it too risky and lacking long-term profitability. Evelyn, however, saw what he had failed to: potential. Within months, Pierce Technologies had secured contracts with some of the biggest corporations in the country. They were becoming a leader in AI security solutions, and their stock was soaring. It wasn't long before industry insiders started whispering about how Hawthorne Capital had snagged the very deal Damien had foolishly let slip through his fingers. But Evelyn wasn't done. She went after other projects, businesses Damien had overlooked, undervalued, or outright dismissed. One by one, she built a portfolio of investments that weren't just successful. They were undermining Damien's empire in ways he hadn't even realized yet. Meanwhile, Damien was growing increasingly frustrated. His first instinct had been to dismiss Evelyn's return to the business world as nothing more than a vanity project, something to keep her occupied, a way to soothe her ego after their divorce. But this was no fleeting endeavor. Evelyn wasn't just succeeding, she was thriving, and worse, she was making all the right moves. The media had taken notice, too. Articles comparing their business strategies started popping up everywhere. Evelyn was being hailed as a visionary, someone who had stepped out of her ex-husband's shadow and built something formidable on her own. And Damien, for the first time in years, his reputation was under scrutiny. His once unquestioned dominance in the corporate world was being challenged. Investors were starting to question his decisions. Board members were bringing up concerns about how he had allowed valuable opportunities to slip through his grasp. At first, he tried to ignore it, but the final blow came when he attended a high-profile investors' gala, one he had been invited to every year without fail. Only this time, the whispers in the room weren't about him. They were about Evelyn. "She's brilliant," one CEO remarked, unaware that Damien was within earshot. "I mean, look at what she's doing. She saw opportunities where others—" He hesitated before lowering his voice, where even Damien Hawthorne failed. Damien clenched his jaw. It was a casual statement, a mere observation, but to him, it was unforgivable. For years, he had been the one at the top, the one everyone admired, respected, feared. Now, his ex-wife was the one being praised in rooms where he had once commanded absolute authority, and that was something he could not tolerate. 2 days later, Damien made his move. Evelyn had just wrapped up a meeting with a new business partner when she stepped into her office, only to find Damien sitting in her chair, waiting for her. She froze for a moment, caught off guard by his presence. Then, with a slow breath, she closed the door behind her and leaned against it. "Well," she said, crossing her arms, "to what do I owe the honor?" Damien stood up, smoothing out his suit. "I see you've been busy." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Did you come all this way just to state the obvious?" His lips curled slightly, but there was no amusement behind it. "I came to talk." She exhaled through her nose, shaking her head. "Talk? About what, Damien? How you walked out of our marriage for some gold-digging 20-something? Or maybe about how you thought I'd fade into irrelevance after the divorce?" He clenched his jaw. "I underestimated you." Evelyn tilted her head. "You did." Silence stretched between them. Damien finally sighed, loosening his tie. "Look, Evelyn, I don't want this." He gestured vaguely between them. "This war." Evelyn let out a short laugh. "War? Damien, you declared war the moment you tossed me aside like I was nothing. This," she gestured around the office, "isn't about revenge. This is about me taking back what I should have had all along." His eyes darkened. "You're trying to destroy me." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "No, Damien. You destroyed yourself when you chose greed over loyalty. I'm just making sure the world sees the kind of man you truly are." He inhaled sharply, his gaze flickering with something she couldn't quite place. For the first time, there was no arrogance, no dismissive smirk, just something raw, something unguarded. For a brief moment, she almost believed he regretted everything. Almost. But then he said, "Is this really what you want? A battle neither of us can win?" Evelyn narrowed her eyes. "You still don't get it, do you?" She stepped even closer, close enough that he could see the fire in her eyes. "I already won." Damien left her office that day angry, humiliated, and, most of all, afraid. Because for the first time, he realized something terrifying. Evelyn wasn't just a woman scorned. She was a woman reborn, and nothing, not even him, was going to stop her. Evelyn sat at her desk long after Damien had left, staring out the window at the skyline that once felt so distant, but now seemed entirely within her grasp. His visit was expected. Men like Damien always tried to reclaim control when they sensed it slipping through their fingers. But this time, she wasn't the naive wife who once believed in love, trust, and blind devotion. This time, she was the one pulling the strings. She had no intention of backing down. The business world had already seen too many powerful men like Damien, who thought they could discard women without consequence, who assumed they were invincible simply because they had money, influence, and a well-practiced smirk that convinced people they were untouchable. But Evelyn was no longer part of Damien's world. She was building her own, and she was just getting started. Meanwhile, Damien was losing control. His empire, once built on unquestioned power, was now crumbling beneath him. His board members were restless, concerned that his decision-making was growing reckless. His relationship with Vanessa, the very woman he had left Evelyn for, was becoming increasingly strained. He had envisioned a life filled with excitement and ease. Instead, he was discovering that Vanessa was high maintenance, demanding, and worst of all, unimpressed by his problems. "I don't get why you care so much about your ex," Vanessa said one evening, flipping through a magazine as Damien paced their penthouse. "You've got me now, remember?" Damien shot her a sharp look. "This isn't about Evelyn," Vanessa snorted. "Sure, that's why you've been grumbling about her for the past month." He clenched his jaw. "She's a problem. Sounds like you made her that way," she replied lazily, not even looking up. Damien exhaled harshly, running a hand through his hair. "This isn't a joke, Vanessa. She's targeting my business. She's making moves that—" Vanessa set her magazine down and rolled her eyes. "Damien, be serious. Evelyn was a trophy wife. She followed you around like a lost puppy for years. She doesn't have the spine to—" "She does now." he interrupted. And that was what unsettled him the most. The Evelyn he once knew no longer existed. She had stepped into the world he thought he dominated, and she wasn't just competing, she was outplaying him. Evelyn's latest acquisition was the final nail in Damien's coffin. She had quietly secured a deal to buy out one of his most valuable partnerships, one that Hawthorne Enterprises depended on heavily. When the news hit, it sent shockwaves through the financial world. For the first time, Damien's empire wasn't just struggling, it was in danger. The media went wild, articles flooded in. Evelyn Hawthorne strikes again. Another victory against her ex-husband's empire. Once cast aside, now a power player. How Evelyn Hawthorne became a force in the business world. Hawthorne Enterprises faces its biggest threat yet, and it's personal. Damien was drowning in headlines, but the worst part wasn't the press. It was his own board turning against him. "We need to talk," one of his senior investors said during a tense board meeting. "This company is bleeding, Damien, and you're at the center of it." Another board member leaned forward, fixing Damien with a sharp stare. "You told us you had control of the situation." Damien's grip on the table tightened. "I do." A dry chuckle sounded from the other end of the room. "No, Damien, you don't." The tension in the room was suffocating. His once loyal allies were now questioning his leadership, something that had never happened before, and as much as he hated to admit it, they had every reason to. Evelyn wasn't just winning. She was proving that she never needed him in the first place. Evelyn knew the moment Damien's company hit its breaking point. She had expected retaliation, a desperate attempt to undermine her progress. But what she didn't expect was for Damien to show up at her office again. This time he wasn't smug, confident, or composed. This time he looked like a man on the verge of losing everything. "You got what you wanted," Damien said as soon as he stepped inside, his voice low, tense. "You've destroyed me." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "I haven't done anything you didn't already set in motion yourself." He let out a harsh laugh. "Don't do that. Don't act like you haven't been strategically cutting me down piece by piece." She tilted her head. "And?" Damien inhaled sharply. "And I want to know what you want from me." Evelyn stood, walking around her desk until she was standing directly in front of him. Then, with a slow, measured voice, she said, "I want you to feel every ounce of what you put me through. I want you to understand what it's like to be discarded, underestimated, and left to rebuild alone. I want you to know that I never needed you, Damien, and I never will." Silence filled the room. Damien swallowed, his jaw tightening. "So that's it?" Evelyn smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "No, Damien," she said softly, "that's just the beginning." The fallout was brutal. Within a month, Damien was forced to step down as CEO. His company, once unshakable, was now in shambles, scrambling to recover from his mismanagement and arrogance. Investors had lost faith. The board had turned against him. And Evelyn, she was on top. She had become everything Damien never thought she could be, and more. She was no longer the wife he controlled. She was the woman who had built her own empire, one that stood on her own terms. And Damien? He was left watching from the shadows, realizing that the greatest mistake of his life wasn't losing his company. It was losing her. Damien sat in the dimly lit lounge of an upscale bar, his fingers gripping a half-empty glass of whiskey. The once celebrated name Damien Hawthorne had become synonymous with scandal, financial ruin, and corporate failure. His company, his legacy, was no longer his. His board of directors had voted him out. His investors had withdrawn their trust, and the empire he had built was now under new leadership that wasn't his own. It was Evelyn's, and his ex-wife. The woman he had betrayed, discarded, and dismissed had become the one force he could not defeat. The irony was so bitter it almost made him laugh. The bar was crowded, filled with the usual elite businessmen, men he used to rub shoulders with when he was at the top. Now, when they saw him, they whispered behind their glasses. He was no longer admired, he was pitied. And that stung more than anything. Damien. The sound of Vanessa's voice made his jaw tighten. He glanced up to see her standing there, dressed in a skin-tight black dress, a designer clutch in one hand, and her signature look of entitlement on her face. "I heard what happened," she said, sliding into the seat across from him uninvited. "You look awful," Damien scoffed. "Well, that makes two of us." Vanessa's expression hardened for a second before she leaned in. "I came to see if you had a plan." "A plan for what?" "For getting back on top." Damien stared at her for a long moment before he laughed, a sharp, bitter laugh. "There is no back on top, Vanessa," he said, shaking his head. Evelyn made sure of that. Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, you're going to let your ex-wife ruin you?" "She didn't ruin me," Damien said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "I did that all on my own." For once, Vanessa had nothing to say, and that was how Damien knew she was about to walk away for good. She had never loved him, not really. She had loved his power, his wealth, his status. But now that he had none of those things, she had no reason to stay. Sure enough, Vanessa sighed, grabbed her clutch, and stood up. "Call me when you get your act together," she said before disappearing into the crowd. Damien didn't watch her go. He already knew he would never call her. Meanwhile, Evelyn's world had never been brighter. Her company, her empire, was thriving. She had spent months proving herself not just to the world but to herself. She had taken back control of her life. She was no longer defined by the man she used to love. Now she was her own story, and she was unstoppable. One evening she was preparing for a major business event, one that Hawthorne Enterprises would be headlining, when she received a call from an unknown number. She debated whether or not to answer, but something told her she should, so she did. Evelyn. She knew that voice. She had once loved that voice, but now it felt like a ghost from a life she no longer recognized. "What do you want, Damien?" Silence and then a sigh. I wanted to talk," he said, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it before. Evelyn leaned against her desk. "Talk about what? The fact that you lost your company? Or the fact that you thought I would fail, and now I'm standing exactly where you used to be?" "I deserved that," he admitted. She blinked. She had expected anger, excuses, or manipulation, but not honesty. "I deserved all of it," Damien continued. "And I don't expect you to care, but I wanted to say I was wrong. About you. About everything." Evelyn's fingers tightened around her phone. Once upon a time, those words would have meant everything to her. Now, they meant nothing, because she didn't need his validation anymore. "I hope you figure things out, Damien," she said, her voice steady. "But I don't need your apology. I never did." And with that, she hung up. The night of the high-profile business gala, Evelyn walked into the grand ballroom as the woman everyone wanted to know. The whispers that followed her were not of pity or scandal, but of admiration and respect. She had rebuilt herself from the ground up. She had been thrown aside, but she had become greater than anyone had ever imagined. A journalist approached her with a microphone. "Miss Hawthorne, how does it feel to stand where you are now, after everything you've been through?" Evelyn smiled, a smile that was neither bitter nor vengeful, but one of absolute certainty. "It feels," she said slowly, "exactly how it was always supposed to feel." And somewhere, in a darkened bar, Damien Hawthorne sat alone, watching her on a television screen, knowing for the first time in his life that he had lost something he could never get back, and it was entirely his fault. Damien sat in his darkened penthouse, a place that once radiated power, success, and luxury. Now it felt cold, empty, just like his life. The silence was deafening. For the first time in his life, he had no one to call. Vanessa had left him. His business partners had distanced themselves. The so-called friends who used to gather around him, vying for his attention, had disappeared the moment he was no longer the Damien Hawthorne, the ruthless millionaire who once commanded the business world. He took a slow sip of whiskey, the liquid burning his throat as he stared at the city skyline. He had spent years climbing to the top of the world, only to throw it all away for something fleeting and meaningless. He had thought he was invincible, that he could replace Evelyn with someone younger, someone more exciting. But what had he really replaced her with? Nothing. The truth hit him like a punch to the gut. He had never really known Vanessa, not the way he had known Evelyn. Evelyn had once been his partner in every sense of the word. She had challenged him, supported him, believed in him, and he had let her go. No, he had pushed her away, and now she was thriving. The woman he had dismissed, humiliated, and cast aside had built herself into a force greater than he had ever been, and she had done it without him. That realization made him feel small for the first time in his life. At that very moment, Evelyn was walking into a luxury gala, her presence turning heads the second she stepped through the entrance. She had been invited as a guest of honor, a title that once belonged to Damien but was now solely hers. She wasn't just Damien's ex-wife. She was Evelyn Hawthorne, the woman who rebuilt what he had tried to destroy. Dressed in an elegant silk gown, she radiated confidence. She had fought to reclaim her power, and tonight was proof that she had succeeded. As she made her way through the grand hall, she noticed the hushed whispers, the admiring glances. She used to wonder if people only saw her as Damien's ex-wife, a woman who had been discarded. But tonight, no one was whispering about Damien. They were whispering about her. And then a voice broke through the murmurs. Evelyn. She turned, and there he was, Damien. His presence used to make her heart race. Now, it made her feel nothing. He was dressed in an expensive suit, but there was something different about him. He looked tired, worn down. For the first time, she saw the cracks in his once impenetrable armor. Evelyn lifted her chin. "What do you want, Damien?" He hesitated, something he never used to do. He exhaled. "I wanted to see you." Her lips curled into a humorless smile. "You've already seen me." Damien swallowed hard, his hands tightening into fists. "You really won, didn't you?" he muttered almost to himself. Evelyn tilted her head. "Was this ever a competition?" He let out a dry chuckle. "You tell me." She studied him for a long moment. Once she had loved him, deeply, unconditionally. But that love had been shattered, not by time, but by betrayal. And now there was nothing left. She felt no hatred, no bitterness, and only freedom. "I'm not here to play games, Damien," she said, her voice steady. "You wanted your new life, and you got it. I wanted mine, and I built it." His jaw tightened. "Evelyn." She lifted a hand, cutting him off. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for," she said. "But I'm not it." With that, she turned and walked away. Damien stood frozen, watching her disappear into the crowd. And for the first time in his life, he understood what true loss felt like. Not the loss of money, not the loss of power, but the loss of the one person who had ever truly mattered. And the worst part? It was all his fault. Damien remained standing amidst the elegant crowd, his heart hammering in his chest, as Evelyn vanished into the sea of people. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the hum of chatter, it all blurred into white noise. His world had never felt so empty. He had once thought he could have everything. Power, success, women. He had believed that life would always cater to him, that he could discard Evelyn, replace her, and still come out on top. But here he was, alone, with nothing but regret gnawing at his soul. He had spent years thinking that leaving Evelyn was the right choice, that Vanessa was the better option, that he deserved someone new, exciting, fresh. But what had he truly gained? He had built a fortune only to watch it dwindle. He had sought out passion only to find himself empty. And worst of all, he had lost Evelyn, the woman who had once stood beside him through everything, the woman who had been his true partner. And now he was nothing more than a bitter memory to her. Evelyn walked through the grand hall, her poise unwavering, though her fingers trembled slightly as she took a sip of champagne. She hadn't expected Damien to be here. She hadn't expected him to look at her the way he did, like a man who had finally realized what he had lost. But it didn't matter. It was too late. She had spent years picking up the pieces of the life he shattered. She had suffered, she had cried, she had doubted herself. But those days were over. Tonight was proof of that. She was no longer Evelyn Hawthorne, the woman who had been left behind. She was Evelyn Hawthorne, the woman who had built herself into something greater. And no one could take that away from her. "Evelyn," a voice called. She turned to see Marcus Adler, one of the most respected business moguls in the city, approaching with a warm smile. "Marcus," she greeted, shaking his hand. "I just wanted to say," he began, "I've been following your work, and I have to say, I'm impressed. You've built something incredible." A genuine smile touched her lips. "Thank you, that means a lot." "I know it wasn't easy," Marcus continued, his gaze turning serious. "Starting over, rebuilding, making a name for yourself after what happened." She knew what he meant. Everyone did. But she had never let it define her. "I wasn't given a choice," she admitted. "It was either fall apart or rise again." Marcus nodded. "And rise you did." As they spoke, Evelyn felt it again. That certainty that she had made it, that she had escaped the shadow of Damien Hawthorne, and she was never going back. Damien, however, couldn't move on so easily. Hours later, as the gala continued, he found himself nursing another glass of whiskey, his eyes never straying far from Evelyn. She was laughing now, deep in conversation with Marcus Adler. She looked happy. She looked like a woman who had completely erased him from her life, and that realization stung. "Damien," a voice interrupted his thoughts. He turned, already irritated, only to see Vanessa. She looked stunning as always, but something had shifted. Gone was the woman who used to cling to his arm, flashing smug smirks at Evelyn whenever she saw her. Now Vanessa's eyes held resentment, bitterness, and he knew why. His once thriving company was falling apart. His reputation had taken a serious hit, and Vanessa was not the type to stick around when the money started to run dry. "I heard about your latest business troubles," Vanessa said, swirling the wine in her glass. "Things aren't looking too great for you, are they?" Damien clenched his jaw. "I don't need your commentary, Vanessa," she smirked. "Oh, but I think you do. You see, I've been thinking a lot lately, and I realized I made a mistake." His brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" Vanessa leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I should have never bet on a man who built his empire on someone else's back." Damien stiffened. Vanessa chuckled. "You really thought you could leave Evelyn and still thrive?" She shook her head. "You didn't just lose a wife, Damien. You lost your entire foundation." The words cut deeper than he wanted to admit, because she was right. Without Evelyn, everything he had built had crumbled. "You're a sinking ship," Vanessa continued, her voice dripping with amusement. "And I, Damien, have no interest in drowning with you." He scoffed. "So what, you're leaving?" Vanessa finished her wine and set down the glass. "I already have." And with that she walked away, never looking back. Evelyn stepped out onto the balcony, taking in the crisp night air. The city glittered below her, a reminder of how far she had come. She had survived. She had thrived. And Damien. He was nothing but a closed chapter in her life. She wouldn't waste another second on regret. She had too much ahead of her, too much to look forward to. And as she turned to head back inside, for the first time in years, she felt truly, completely free. Damien left the gala in a daze, his mind clouded with frustration, regret, and a sickening realization. He had lost everything. The cold night air did nothing to numb the weight pressing down on his chest. The city lights blurred as he walked aimlessly, his thoughts drowning him. How did it come to this? How had he, Damien Hawthorne, the man who once had it all, become nothing but a shell of his former self? Vanessa was gone. His business was crumbling. His reputation was in ruins. And Evelyn, she had moved on. The way she had looked at him tonight, it wasn't hatred, it wasn't anger. It was indifference. She didn't care about him anymore, and that stung more than anything. He had once thought he was the one who had won, that leaving her had been his victory. But now, he was the only loser. Evelyn, on the other hand, had never felt lighter. The gala had been a perfect success, not just for her business but for herself. She had walked into that room with her head held high, and she had left it knowing she had reclaimed everything Damien had tried to take from her. It wasn't just about the company. It wasn't just about proving something to the world. It was about proving something to herself. She was strong, she was resilient, and most importantly, she was free. She had rebuilt her life, and Damien, he was nothing but a ghost from her past. She had spent too many nights wondering what could have been, too many days doubting herself. But now she finally saw the truth. He had done her a favor by leaving, because without him, she had become unstoppable. Damien sat in his penthouse, staring blankly at the skyline. It felt empty, hollow, a reflection of everything he had left. For years he had convinced himself that power and money would always be enough, that he didn't need love, that he didn't need Evelyn. But now, all the power in the world couldn't change the fact that he was utterly, completely alone. Vanessa was gone. His business was hanging by a thread. His so-called friends, they had abandoned him the moment his empire began to fall. And Evelyn? She had moved on to something greater. He had seen it in her eyes tonight, and she didn't need him. And that truth was the most painful of all. For the first time, Damien wondered what his life would have been like if he had chosen differently. If he had chosen Evelyn. If he had fought for her instead of betraying her. Would he still have everything? Or had he always been doomed to lose her? Evelyn arrived home, slipping off her heels as she stepped inside her penthouse. She had spent years building this. A home that was truly hers. No longer a mansion that felt like a prison. No longer a place where she had to shrink herself to fit into someone else's world. This was hers. A space filled with light, warmth, and freedom. She poured herself a glass of wine, sinking onto the couch with a deep sigh. Tonight had been a reminder of how far she had come, and she was grateful. Grateful for every hardship, every betrayal, every painful moment that had forced her to rise. Because now, she wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. And she would never ever let someone like Damien Hawthorne take that from her again. The next morning, Damien woke up to a nightmare. His phone was ringing nonstop, notifications flooding in from every direction, news articles, emails, messages from his legal team. His company was crashing, hard. One of his major investors had pulled out overnight and the ripple effect was devastating. Stock prices had plummeted. Confidence in his leadership had shattered. And worst of all, the whispers had started. Investors were beginning to question if he was even capable of running his own empire anymore. His hands clenched around his phone. This couldn't be happening, not to him, not to Damien Hawthorne. He had built this company from the ground up. He had sacrificed everything to make it what it was. And now, it was slipping through his fingers like sand. He needed a solution, fast. Meanwhile, Evelyn sat in her office, completely unbothered by the chaos unfolding on Damien's end. She had spent too long worrying about his downfall. Now, it was his problem, not hers. She had work to do, she had clients to meet, she had a life to live. And for the first time in a long, long time, she didn't care what happened to him, because she finally understood what real success looked like. And it had nothing to do with revenge. It had nothing to do with proving herself to Damien. It had everything to do with being truly, undeniably free. Damien sat in his office, gripping the edge of his desk as he read the latest report. The numbers were a disaster. His company, once the epitome of financial dominance, was on the verge of total collapse. The investor pullout had triggered a domino effect. Clients were losing faith, stockholders were demanding answers, and his executive board was in full-blown panic mode. "How did this happen?" he growled, glaring at his financial advisor. The man shifted nervously. "The market confidence in Hawthorne Enterprises has dropped. After Vanessa's public scandal and, well, your divorce from Evelyn, things haven't been stable. Investors see you as a risk now." Damien clenched his fists. "So you're telling me that people are abandoning me over my personal life?" The advisor hesitated before reluctantly nodding. "Public perception matters, Damien. Evelyn's rise in the business world has made headlines. She's thriving, and people see her as a visionary. Meanwhile, Vanessa ruined your image and, well, you've burned a lot of bridges." Damien slammed his fist on the desk. He had built this empire, he had sacrificed everything for it. And now, because of a string of bad decisions, he was losing it all. He couldn't let this happen. Not now, not ever. Meanwhile, Evelyn was flourishing. Her company had just secured a groundbreaking international partnership, solidifying its status as a global powerhouse. She sat at the head of her conference table, surrounded by executives who respected her. Unlike the days when she had been just Damien's wife, here, she was the one in control. She was the one calling the shots, and nobody was going to take that away from her. Her assistant knocked softly on the door. "Ms. Hawthorne, there's a call for you. From Damien." The room fell silent. Evelyn's expression remained unreadable. Damien hadn't contacted her in months, not since the gala, and now he was calling? She took a slow sip of her coffee before answering, her voice steady. "Put him through." There was a brief pause before his voice came through the line, low, strained, desperate. "Evelyn." She leaned back in her chair, a smirk tugging at her lips. "Damien, to what do I owe this unexpected call?" He exhaled sharply. "I won't waste your time. I need to talk. In person." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "You want to meet me?" "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important," he admitted, his voice unusually tense. She tilted her head, considering. A year ago, she would have been eager for this moment, to have Damien come crawling back. But now she didn't need anything from him, and that made her hold all the power. "Fine," she said finally. "One meeting, but don't waste my time, Damien." Damien waited at an upscale restaurant, his leg bouncing anxiously under the table. He had never felt so out of control. He had always been the one with the upper hand, the one making the decisions. But today he was at her mercy. When Evelyn walked in, every eye in the restaurant seemed to turn toward her. She was radiant, confident, untouchable, and Damien felt a sharp pang in his chest. He had once been the man standing next to her. Now Now he was nothing but a chapter in her past. She slid into the seat across from him, crossing her legs elegantly. "All right, Damien, what do you want?" He hesitated, his pride warring with his desperation. "I need help." Evelyn blinked, genuinely surprised. Damien Hawthorne asking for help? That was a first. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "My company is crumbling. I need an investor to stabilize things, and no one is willing to back me anymore." Evelyn's lips curled into an amused smirk. "So, let me get this straight. You left me for another woman, publicly humiliated me, tore me down, and now you want my help?" He exhaled sharply. "I know I don't deserve it, but you're the only person who can turn this around." Evelyn studied him for a long moment, and then she laughed, a soft, knowing laugh. "Damien, I don't owe you anything." His stomach twisted. "Evelyn, please." She raised a hand, silencing him. "You burned every bridge between us," she said calmly. "And now you expect me to save you?" He swallowed hard. "I was a fool." Evelyn leaned in slightly, her expression unreadable. "You weren't just a fool, Damien. You were cruel. You chose to betray me. And now? Now you have to live with that choice." His jaw tightened. "So that's it? You're just going to watch me fail?" She sighed, standing up. "I'm not going to watch anything, Damien, because I don't care what happens to you anymore." And with that, she walked away, leaving him sitting alone, his world crumbling around him. For the first time in his life, Damien realized something terrifying. He had lost the only person who had ever truly mattered, and there was no getting her back. Evelyn walked out of the restaurant, inhaling deeply. The past had finally closed its doors. Damien was nothing more than a mistake she had learned from. She had spent too long trying to prove something to a man who had never deserved her. But now she had nothing left to prove. She had won. And that, more than anything, was the perfect ending to a story that had once been a nightmare. Because this wasn't Damien's story anymore. It was hers. Evelyn sat in the back seat of her luxury car, staring out at the city skyline as it blurred past. The weight of her encounter with Damien was still fresh in her mind. Not because she cared about him, not because she felt sorry for him, but because, for the first time ever, she had seen him truly defeated. And she hadn't felt a single ounce of pity. The man who had once controlled her life, who had dismissed her like an inconvenience, was now powerless. And the irony of it all? She had the power to save him. But she wouldn't. Not now, not ever. She had spent years believing she needed Damien's approval, that his validation was somehow proof of her worth. But standing across from him today, she realized something monumental. She had been worth everything, even before he saw it, and she would never again let anyone make her feel otherwise. Her driver slowed to a stop outside her office building, and Evelyn straightened her shoulders before stepping out. She wasn't just Damien's ex-wife anymore. She wasn't the woman he left behind. She was Evelyn Hawthorne, CEO, powerhouse, survivor, and she was just getting started. Inside her office, Evelyn's assistant was already waiting. "Ms. Hawthorne, your next meeting is in 10 minutes, she said, handing over a folder. Evelyn took it with a nod, but before her assistant could leave, she hesitated. "Wait." The assistant turned back. "Yes?" Evelyn tapped her manicured fingers against the desk. "Pull up Damien Hawthorne's financials." Her assistant's eyebrows lifted. "You're interested in investing?" Evelyn smirked. "Number, I just want to see how deep in hell he really is." Within minutes, the reports were on her desk. She flipped through them, her lips twitching in amusement. Damien's company wasn't just struggling. It was barely breathing. Investors had abandoned him. Stock had plummeted. And within months, if nothing changed, Hawthorne Enterprises would be nothing more than a cautionary tale. Evelyn leaned back, exhaling slowly. She could buy him out if she wanted to. She could own him. The thought was tempting, but no, she didn't need to. Damien was already drowning. She didn't need to push him under. She just needed to watch. Meanwhile, Damien sat in his penthouse, surrounded by empty whiskey glasses and untouched files. His once perfect world was shattering. And the worst part? He had no one to blame but himself. Vanessa had disappeared the moment his wealth started slipping. She had taken what she could and vanished, leaving behind nothing but a string of unpaid credit card bills and a scandal big enough to tank what was left of his reputation. Damien had thought he could replace Evelyn. That younger, prettier, more exciting would mean better. But all he had now was regret, and an empire that was crumbling beneath his feet. He stared at his phone. At the number he had dialed 1,000 times but never had the courage to call. Evelyn. Would she pick up? Would she even care? He knew the answer. And yet, as his company crumbled, as his legacy turned to dust, he realized that losing Evelyn had been his greatest failure, because she had been the one thing in his life that had ever truly mattered, and he had let her go. For nothing, for no one. Damien Hawthorne had once thought he was untouchable. Now he was just a lesson, a warning. A man who had everything, and threw it all away. If this story moved you, don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Your support means the world to us. Like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Stay tuned for more tales of justice, redemption, and unexpected twists. Unexpected twists. Unexpected twists.